Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima and I'm here taking a look at two games today because, well, I tried to do two games for this Friday video, but for whatever reason I just couldn't get my head around either of them. And of course the first is Romancer 3 Kingdoms 14, which is the latest in Koei Tecmo or Tecmo Koei series. They swap it around every few years. It's starting to annoy me. It's the 14th in their series of historical strategy games based around the Three Kingdoms era. Wei, Wu, and Shu all going up against each other. Bloody Shu's getting into combat, but okay. The first thing I'll say about this is that they really are presented quite well. The two-dimensional art is actually way better in this than it is in Dynasty Warriors. The voice acting is also taken a fair bit more seriously as well, which I appreciate. And the overall quality of just, the presentation in general is fantastic. There's nothing wrong with it. And the way they do things like historical events look great pretty much all the time. Then you get to the overall performance of the PC version, which is one of the reasons why I fell off the game so quickly. Now, for most people, this won't be a problem. The game's overall set of graphical options and just general options is not great, but here's the big deal breaker for me personally. It runs at 30 frames a second all the time, and I've got this set up so I can only really comfortably play games on my middle monitor, which is a 240Hz GeForce equipped monitor. Not GeForce, G-Sync equipped monitor. And now, I'm not trying to brag here, because there's something about these kinds of monitors that you need to know about. If anything goes below about 40 frames a second, and it's 40, it's not 30, it's 40, it's weird. But if anything goes below 40 frames a second, the monitor starts flickering like it's trying to give me a seizure. And there's no way around it when you're playing a game that's locked to 30 frames a second. And it's driving me mad, if I'm being perfectly honest. It's kind of frustrating, because I can't move it onto another thing because my mouse and keyboard aren't set up right, and I bloody crick my neck trying to look at the different monitors. So, yeah, I tried turning off the G-Sync as well, but for whatever reason it just doesn't do anything, and yeah, since the game's frame rate is locked to 30 frames a second, it just refuses to not be a flickery mess unless I play it in like 720p windowed or something like that, which is just silly. So that's also the reason why I couldn't record footage for it and why I'm relying on a trailer from the official Tecmo Koei channel, which is also on the PC version, funnily enough. But yes, the game itself is actually pretty simple to understand. You control territories, and you also have things like cities that you can apply governments to that'll increase your capabilities in one area or another, whether it be like military or resource gathering or stuff like that. You've got 3 resources you need to worry about: gold, supplies, and troops. Supplies help you... Actually, I'm not entirely sure what supplies do, because another thing that I don't like about this game is that the tutorial isn't very in-depth. There's a lot of things it glosses over. It doesn't really get into what supplies actually do. Gold is pretty simple. You can use it to do things like recruit officers, do certain things with your advisors in order to do things like improve your cities and all that. Spend and sell to merchants, but supplies, they just don't really tell you that much about. It's a bit weird. But yes, you use these 3 things to build up your supply of troops, and then you can send them out to conquer areas. So you can send them out in you send troops out in certain formations, and this will allow you to take over areas. You can see on the little map that there is thick white lines. Those separate areas, and then the thin white lines separate hexes, and you can take over individual hexes, but with certain people who have certain formations, they can take over wider areas. If you conquer an area completely, you get more resources from it, and once you've conquered all these areas, you then send those troops out to fight other nations. All the scenarios in this game basically play out the same way, in the sense that they start at a specific point in history, and you basically just have to try and take over the entirety of China, because that's the entire point of the Three Kingdoms. I played about 2 games, and I was doing relatively well until a couple of really annoying things screwed me over, and I realized that if I was going to have to play with mechanics like that, it was going to annoy the shit out of me. But let's get into those, actually. So you've got your formations, which you can actually see on screen right now if I've synced up the audio to this properly. And the different formations can do different things. Some of them will be better for building, some of them will be better for going on the attack or being on the defense, some of them will be better for sieging. You can't change formations while once they've already deployed. I don't know why. It seems like a really simple thing to do. Like, I can understand not being deployed for, say, siege warfare when you're based around just, like, trying to attack field units, right? But for some reason you can't do it. This drives me mad, because if you've sent out, like, 2 dudes with low amounts of troops to do a bit of surveying, and then someone comes along and decides to attack them, like a random bandit that's just decided to spawn because of an end-of-turn event, well, you're screwed? That seems to be all there is to it. And this happens a lot. Like, I ended up having a lot of my dudes out trying to conquer another city, and then some dudes decided, oh, I'm not friends with you anymore, and they just decided to invade my territory while I wasn't there to defend it. And that pretty much screwed my entire game over, and that gave me a game over. You could probably blame that on me, sure, but it was so random just when he decided to come and attack me. I'm not entirely sure what I did to provoke him. We were friends before that point, but he was just like, nah, I'm going to take over your stuff now. Then when I looked back at, like, the historical map, it turned out that, yeah, that guy was actually conquered historically, which was not great, but certainly something that I wasn't a particular fan of, I'll tell you that much. Another really annoying mechanic I found in this game is duels. Now, the way combat works in this game is pretty simple. Everyone has their troops, their morale, and their skills. And their skills can be triggered by doing pretty much anything, except that it's like conditions in the background. You can't automatically trigger them. So, your basic, well, not, I say automatically, I mean, you can't manually trigger them. You can't be like, hey, can you activate this skill now? No, you have to meet the conditions. But, here's the thing. There's officer versus officer duels in this game, which look a lot like a Dynasty Warriors game, but it's like just a cutscene that you can watch. And depending on who wins, the loser actually loses a bunch of morale. And if you run out of troops or morale, that breaks the unit, and sometimes that can result in the death of an officer. There are things you can customize, like whether or not officers age, whether or not they die, how much resources you get per turn, depending on how much stuff you have, you know. Basic stuff, but nothing that would particularly encourage me to play longer. But I had like 16,000 troops split between 2 units attacking this one dude, right? Who had about 5,000, 6,000 troops. And we were attacking him. We were very clearly about to win. He was losing troops like wildfire. But then he's like, oh no, I'm going to attack you now. I'm going to duel you now. I'm just going to go straight out, I'm going to whip your ass. And that's what he did. Despite the fact that I had a strength of 72 and he had a strength of like 81, and we surrounded him with like 10k more troops, apparently this one-on-one duel was enough to bring down the morale of the stronger troop almost to nothing, to the point where he lost, and then my guy just got flattened. And this is the example of something that's happened with every single duel that I've had. All the AI has needed to do is bring along someone with like 85 strength, fight against, like, even if it's like 3-on-1, all he needs to do is duel the dude with the most troops, win, which almost always happens, and then you just lose everything. That is every single duel that I've been in. All the AI needs to do is stroll up and win. And it really pisses me off, because it seems like I can't win anything when the AI decides it just has a fuck you button they can bring out at any particular time. Even with all of my particular dudes, like, I somehow managed to get, Zhao Yun, I think it was, who's like one of the major officers of the Three Kingdoms well before he was supposed to come into the story. I don't know much about the Three Kingdoms, but the Three Kingdoms era, but I know that having him is a big deal. Like, he's like one of the biggest husbandos in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms saga sort of thing when it comes to Dynasty Warriors, at least. So I know how important he is. Even he couldn't win fucking duels. He'd lose to people with lower strength than he had. I don't know how the fuck it works, but it just drives me mad. Outside of that, though, you got some other mechanics going on, like you can you've got 4 turns per month, I believe. And those 4 turns take place in 2 phases. You've got your administration phase where you can do things like give gold to your officers to improve towns and stuff like that. Then you've got the advancement phase where everyone moves around and does all of their orders that you gave them in the previous phase. And the thing is, it just doesn't seem like you can do that much. You've got a few things you can do. Like, you can send out plots that will do things like reduce morale, do things like cause like havoc inside someone's town, things like that to try and get people like just, you know, in a worse place so that they're easier to take over. I could never get these plots to work. Even with my most intelligent people on the case, it would just never happen. And I don't know why. I was trying to do these every single turn. Outside of doing these plots, moving your troops around to try and get them to, well, do anything, basically, there really isn't that much else you can do. Recruiting people seems to rely on whether or not your officers feel like it that day. There's not really that much you can do to influence battles other than just make sure your guys have the best formation, the best leader, and the best, and the most soldiers, which you can do at, like, you know, which you have to do at, the organization phase, not the actual phase where they're marching. So you don't really have that much control over when battles happen, and you can't really do, what's the phrase I'm looking for? You can't really take control of any battles. It's just kind of sitting there and watching it happen. You can't do anything to really ensure it succeeds once it starts happening. You just have to kind of hope that you made the right decisions ahead of time, which I'm not the biggest fan of, especially since even when you've got a dude like weighed down 3-1, if you try to evacuate someone who's about to run out of morale, he'll keep getting drawn back into the battle like a black hole's pulling him in. And it's thoroughly frustrating. And there's not really that much else you can do. You can try and woo other people, but at the end of the day, you're trying to take them over. So you have to move in and just steamroll them at some point. So there really isn't that much in the way of diplomacy to do. I mean, it makes sense. It's the Three Kingdoms period, but it just means that a lot of the game's going to be focused around the combat, which again, I'm not really satisfied with, just because duels seem to be so thoroughly unbalanced against the player, and you have to do everything during the planning phase, which means like one move from the AI can ruin even the best laid plans. And that's pretty much all I've got to say about it. I'm just not that enthused with it. You've got historical events as well that can happen. Like, for example, the fractioning of the Anti-Dongzhua coalition is an event that you can do if you're doing it during that scenario. So I was working with the Anti-Dongzhua coalition, and I was trying to help them out, but it actually got split really early on, and that's kind of what screwed me in the end, because that's what made Yuan Shao attack me. But yeah, just those random events like that can also screw you over. There are also more generic ones that you can get that are things like take over certain territories, get a certain amount of officers, do other generic events like that in order to be like, in order to get things like extra XP. And there are things like promoting officers and doing things like that in order to get them to do more intense stuff. But really, the couple of games I played were more than enough to tell me that I don't really appreciate this game for what it does, if I'm being honest. The strategy is infuriating due to several things like not being able to change your formation on the fly, not being able to determine whether or not a duel is going to happen that's going to screw you over, despite the fact you outnumber them 3-1. And just having to sit there and watch things happen. It's just, admittedly, it's just not my kind of strategy game. I'm sure someone appreciates it, but man, judging by the comments that, not the comments, the reviews that were happening around the Steam version of Romance of the Three Kingdoms 14 before the English version came out, it wasn't looking too great, if I'm being perfectly honest. There were a lot of people, even with like tens of hours in the game, who were giving it bad reviews. There are also people who have apparently been having tons of problems with the game crashing. I didn't have anything like that, but, well, it's worth notifying you about anyway. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say about it. I'm just not a fan of it. I don't like the way it does the strategy. I don't like the fact that it's a bit combat heavy, and I don't like the fact that the combat is basically just hope you made the right decision a few turns ago, now wait and see if you win, more or less. And I'm just not that enthused about it, if I'm being perfectly honest. So that was a look at one game that I tried to play, and I actually kind of appreciate the kind of irony that we've got going on here, because we're moving from a game called Romance of the Three Kingdoms 14 to Lack of Love. And I'll be back in a second just to swap the videos over. Alright, I'm back, so let's talk about Lack of Love, or LOL, Lack of Love. It's a weird name even today, which is strange, because that's definitely not what LOL stands for in the modern internet ecosphere, but we'll deal with it. So, this is a weird-ass game from the same people who made Moon, RPG adventure, and there was this other game in between that was also really weird that I cannot remember the name of, but this is their final game before the studio split off to go and do their own things in a bunch of independent studios, which was a bit weird for 2001. And it's kind of a life simulator, but it's also kind of an adventure game. So the way it works is you control this weird animal that's been seeded by Earth on a foreign planet because we're running out of resources to live, basically. And we need to go basically learn more about the environment, help out animals, and survive long enough to transform into a higher kind of animal. So I tried playing this. I really did, because it's a game that's interested me for a while, but it's never been available in English. But honestly, after having played it for at least a little bit, you don't really need that much English to work out what you need to do, although it would be preferred. Now, the one thing that makes this game immediately unapproachable to a lot of people, and this is why I'm also not recording my own footage of it, by the way, because it's kind of hard to, is that it's actually really hard to efficiently play, because you need to play it on an emulator. And I tried playing it on Redream, which is my choice of Dreamcast emulator, and it just wouldn't accept the, well, I call it an ISO, but it isn't actually an ISO, it's a different format. But it doesn't actually accept the file type that this is. So you find yourself needing to make a more in-depth effort to make it work. I ended up having to pull out a different emulator by the name of D-Mule to actually get it to work. And D-Mule is a bit weird. It doesn't do the emulation of the Dreamcast analog stick correctly. I had an Xbox 360 controller, and I was trying to use it to play the game, but the way that it detects the analog stick means that the only real effective way there is to play this game is to move around in diagonals, because it can't detect straight up, straight down, straight left, or straight right properly. And even if you're trying to play on keyboard, because I was trying to figure out a problem with my Xbox 360 controller at the time, you can only move in diagonals. It doesn't detect straight up, straight down, straight left, or straight right properly. Really freaking weird, and it actually made the game a lot more annoying to play than you might think, because being able to move in a game where you really need to explore is kind of important. But here's the drill. You play as an animal, and you get a certain set of abilities. So you get the ability to attack people, say hello, go to sleep to recover your energy, eat other monsters or plants to get your energy back, because you have two different things. You got your health and you got your energy, and you can get your energy back by sleeping. And you get more abilities as you evolve. How do you evolve? Well, you do specific goals for the animals that are around the place. How do you know what those goals are? No freaking idea. I spent 45 minutes wandering around the first goddamn level before I said to myself, well, it wasn't really 45 minutes, it was closer to 30, but still, it felt like a long time. I had to go and, I got one goal out of 3 done, but then I had to go and consult a guide, because I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do here? And yeah, as it turns out, a lot of the solutions to what you need to do in this game very, very adventure game logic-y, very adventure game puzzle-y, because you need to go up to certain creatures, instead of attacking them, you need to do things like show them how to attack another monster in order for them to be, like, friends with you. And it just gets weirder as it goes on. Like, I eventually gave up by, like, trying to get to the third transformation, because I was kind of sick of looking back at the guide, if I'm being perfectly honest, because this is one game where it really feels like you either need to have lots of time to just explore and figure out what you're doing, or you need to go around and, or you need to go and just consult a guide. Because the solutions are just a little bit whack like that. But yeah, once you have successfully managed to get the favors done, you can take them and you can get a new transformation. And there's a fair few of these. It's split into individual levels that can all do, like, it's split into individual levels that all have, like, different transformations and all that. The most annoying thing about the game, though, is that if you die and you forgot to save, it sends you right back to the beginning of the game. And I was just trying to figure out the way the game was, you know, how the game worked and all that while I was playing through it. This resulted in me dying a couple of times in the first level, and it results in you having to go through the intro cutscene and the intro bits again, which take a good few minutes just to, like, even to skip your way through. So it just ends up feeling kind of annoying in that sense. The game does kind of get helped out by its unique graphical style and its unique premise, because there ain't nothing Earth-like about these planets. Sure, there are some, like, notable things about them, but at the same time, they are definitely, like, otherworldly. It is a bit weird in that sense. So yeah, overall, it's kind of a neat game. It's not something I would outright recommend, though, because it feels a bit, like, it feels a bit Moon Logic-y. It feels like you really have to just spend ages wandering around, doing specific things to specific monsters in order to try and figure out what you're doing. And actually trying to play it and control it on a PC, at least at this point, is a little bit more frustrating than I would like to admit. This was meant to be a minor video, just like something that I could put in the backlog, but considering that I wasn't able to get my video on Romance of the Three Kingdoms 14 done, and I was having a lot of trouble with this as well, I decided, screw it, let's put the two of them together. Again, not something I would personally recommend, but it's kind of weird, it's kind of neat. It's cool that it got an English patch. All the English patch really does, as far as I can tell, is make the controls menu more English. I don't know if it does more other than that, because again, I haven't really played through much of this game, but, well, there you go. This has been Bully Maxima, and I will see you all next time.